I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined by Blake Lovell. Blake, basketball season is upon us. Let's get right into it as we talk about the 14 teams in the Southeastern Conference and how we rank them. This should be a better year. Lindy's actually has the SEC is the number one conference in America this year. I just checked Ken Palm. Ken Palm has got the SEC third behind the Big 10 and the Big 12. I think that's a more accurate representation. But in any case, it is going to be an interesting season. I think it's particularly going to be interesting at the top where there are five teams that frankly I cannot separate from. But we've got tiers in this league. Let's start from the bottom. I think Georgia is its own tier. The Bulldogs are just going to have a really tough time avoiding last place, to be honest.
Yeah, Georgia's going to struggle on paper. They, are the worst team in the league heading into the season. PJ Horn's injury, I mean, that just, he was the only guy they had coming back that had any experience whatsoever. And so not having him, and now they've got to basically build an entirely new roster. I think that's going to be a big challenge. I would be surprised if anyone other than Georgia finishes last. And then the rest of that bottom tier, probably you're looking at Missouri, South Carolina, A&M. Those are the other teams. I think, if we're talking about the play-in game and all that on Wednesday nights in the SEC tournament, those are probably the three teams right now you're looking at and thinking probably a strong possibility it's going to be those three teams. But as we know, it doesn't always work out that way. I think A&M probably has the most upside of that group just based on they do have some pretty talented players coming in. And I think that, we may look up and it may be a situation like we saw couple seasons ago where you didn't really expect a whole lot from them, but maybe they grind it out to get into that top 8 somewhere in there and they surprise you a bit. Missouri, I go back and forth on them. They got some good talent coming back. They're bringing in Amari Davis from Green Bay, who I think will be pretty good. But I just don't, obviously they don't have the experience. They don't have the depth I think they had last year. So that knocks them down a bit. And then South Carolina, good luck. I don't know what to expect from South Carolina. We've talked about them over the years being a team that maybe is able to creep into that top half and surprise you. On paper, I don't see that with this particular group.
Yeah, the talk in Columbia is that the chemistry's better. And look, Frank Martin is never going to have a team where they've got first-team All-Americans. It's going to be a bunch of grinders that kind of overachieves. There's been talk that he likes the chemistry, but I just don't know. I don't think that they can bust into the top half of the league given some of the other rosters. But let's move on to the next two. We've kind of got Ole Miss and Vanderbilt in the next tier working from the bottom. Vanderbilt, of course, returns the league's preseason player of the year by almost everybody and Scottie Pippen Jr. Ole Miss lost some key guys, but it's got a lot of its better defenders back. Most people have got Ole Miss ahead of Vanderbilt. In fact, almost everything I've seen does. But Commodores have got a little more star power, and if they can keep some transfers healthy, they've got a shot to be a little sneaky good this year, I think.
Yeah, they'll be interesting. I think that probably the ceiling for them is like an 8th place finish, but when you consider where they've been, that's pretty good. It's much better than being 14th and not winning a game in the SEC. So I do think that there's a lot more potential there with Scottie Pippen, of course, leading the way. A lot of people's picked to be the player of the year. I think the preseason media picked him to win that award. When you have someone like that, it's going to help you and give you an opportunity, I think, to have much more success. But I think it's how everyone else around him plays. That's going to be the big key, I think, for Vanderbilt. Because last year you had Dylan DeSue and he's not there anymore. So I think it's how's everyone else around them kind of come together? I think they'll be more well-rounded maybe than they've been in recent years too. So that'll help. Probably have a little bit more depth too. Ole Miss, I can't get a good feel on Ole Miss because, it's like they're losing Devontae Shuler. Romello White was there. I think they'll be a good defensive team. I just don't know what to expect from them on offense, and I think that's the biggest thing I wonder about with them right now. So I don't think I'm going to say that Ole Miss is going to be one of those teams going to drop into that bottom tier, but I think I do have a hard time, and it probably goes for Vanderbilt too. I think you can put both those teams and say they're not on paper, to the point to where you're just like, I would be shocked if they were to finish much lower than expected. But I also don't know that the ceiling is all that high either in terms of where they can get to. So yeah, these are the two teams I think kind of go in that 9-10 spot just because you don't really know where else to put them, and I think that's kind of where they're at right now.
The next tier as we move up from the bottom, Florida, LSU, Mississippi State. Mississippi State was in Chris Dortch's preseason top 25 at Blue Ribbon. Florida, almost everywhere you look, is an 8 or 9 seed in brackets. And LSU, a team that lost a lot, but it did get Darius Days back. LSU at the transfer market hard. Mississippi State, well, frankly, I was going to say they look like the best team, but I don't know. So many transfers are going to play key parts in all these teams. It's hard to know how to sort them out. And, of course, chemistry is going to be a big factor. How quickly do these guys gel? But when you look at those three teams, who pops the most?
Yeah, there are so many new players in the SEC this year, and I think that is going to make this much harder to predict, probably more so than every year. And I know we say that every year, but I think this year especially so because you're going to have a lot of new pieces that aren't just freshmen. Like you've got a lot of different guys being added to the mix. I would like to think that it is Mississippi State, but I just don't offense. I don't know what they're gonna do. Like I think they're long, they're athletic. I think they'll rebound well. They'll play defense, but scoring wise, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly that's gonna look like. But they do have Iverson Molinar, who could be kind of a sneaky SEC Player of the Year candidate if they were to exceed expectations. And I do think when I wouldn't be surprised if we look up and say, well, everything came together. These guys that transferred in, like DJ Jeffries and Garrison Brooks, guys like that, they, played up to their potential and really were exactly what Mississippi State needed. If they do, I think Mississippi State can probably finish in the top 5. But if they don't, then I think they are kind of this team that's kind of wandering around in the middle, maybe a bubble team, maybe not a bubble team. But LSU, I just don't. I mean, look, Darius Days is coming back. I know Xavier Pinson's there, but the Adam Miller injury I think really hurt them. Someone who played at Illinois is coming off a number 1 seed team, and now to have him out for the year, that really hurts. I think the depth in the backcourt. They've got Efton Reed coming in, a 5-star kid, but comparing this LSU team to last year's LSU team, there's just such a huge difference in terms of experience, chemistry, all of that, and I don't know where the defense comes from. So yeah. I'm probably a little bit lower on them now than I would have been maybe 6 weeks ago. Florida, I'll just say it. I think Florida's very talented, but I'm always going to think about what I've seen from Florida the past several years, and that's a very inconsistent team that you want to trust, but at the end of the day, you look up and like, well, maybe I shouldn't have trusted them, and I think that's kind of the case here. I mean, look, Trey Mann's not there, right? Like Noah Locke's not there. And I know they've got some good kids coming in, but I don't know how I'm supposed to sit back and, trust Florida completely just because that's kind of been the MO of the Mike White era is that they've just been very inconsistent. When you think that they're going to finally break through and be, an elite top team, maybe they do, but they don't stay there for long. And I know last year, like the Keontae Johnson thing, I don't know. I think you have to just completely, throw out last year because I think it was just something where what do you do after something like that? And so, but still, Florida should be very good. But like you said it, like probably an 8-9 type seed. I don't know that I look at Florida right now and say that's a top 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. So.
Well, when you were talking about LSU a minute ago, and I feel the same way about Florida, I was shaking my head because it's just so hard to get a grasp on what these teams are. The fundamental identity of both is going to be totally overhauled, which, I guess that's just college basketball these days, right? Because there's going to be some teams that we talk about in the top tier that had that same thing, but to me, so hard for me to get a read on those teams. But let's go to the top, and I'm going to mention these in alphabetical order, and God help you if you can sort these out accurately because I can't. You've got Alabama, Auburn, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee, all teams that have reloaded with either transfers or 5-star freshmen or both, all really talented teams. Pick a poll in terms of who likes who because you see these teams just bouncing around like ping pong balls in everybody's ratings. I don't know. I don't know if maybe it's because they won it last year and because I love their guards, and they're going to have a cohesive backcourt with Shackelford and Quinterly, and then they're adding a 5-star point guard. I tend to lean Alabama. I don't think I've seen Alabama as anybody's number 1, But Charles Bediako too. They got him. But you look at Auburn and that front court. Kentucky has reloaded with guys, and more importantly, Kentucky got shooters in the transfer market, which it has not had in a long time. Tennessee's added to Kennedy Chandler. In Arkansas, with Eric Musselman, you got Chris Likes and the other transfers he picked up. I think the title race, I mean, you tell me, I don't remember a time where the title race was as open with as many good teams going into a season in the SEC as is the case right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think Arkansas and Auburn are a little bit behind the other three. I don't know how much, but I have those are the teams I've probably gone back and mixed around the most is Auburn and Arkansas, and which one do I put ahead of the other? I think Auburn is just, I mean, it is what it is. I think at this point you kind of know that Bruce Pearl's going to figure it out. And again, I think he threw out last year for Auburn because it was just there's no postseason, Sharif Cooper thing. It's just sort of one of those years. But I think now that he's got, a group that he's going to be able to build around Jabari Smith. And that's where I think it's going to be interesting with Auburn is they're going to be way more front court oriented than back court oriented. But again, I tend to think Bruce Pearl will figure it out and he'll make it work because we've seen him do that before with teams that maybe did not have a clear identity. But he has had the most success in recent years with teams that have had a really good backcourt that can shoot and all that. I still think they're going to be able to shoot. And the Allen Flanagan injury, I think kind of, that's going to hurt them a little bit early on. But I think once they get him back, I do think they have a chance to, compete for the title. Arkansas, I am high on Arkansas, but I also look at it and think, hold on a second. This is a team that doesn't have Moses Moody or Justin Smith. And I don't see anyone there replacing either one of those two guys. Even though they have talent and they have good guys coming in, I don't see anyone replacing either one. So I think Arkansas is going to be very good, but are they going to be the type of team that could consistently do what they did last year? I think I'm still not sure yet. I think we'll find out the more we kind of see them in non-conference play. But I don't want to say I'm lower on Arkansas than most people probably are, but I probably have more questions just with those two guys gone, even though they obviously have a lot of guys coming back and bringing a bunch of guys, and Musk typically figures it out when it comes to transfers. If there's anyone out there you're going to trust with that, it's him. So that leaves you with the top three. And I think the title race runs through Lexington. I think Kentucky's the best team. I think this is unlike any John Calipari team we've seen in a while. And I think that may actually be a good thing because I think that they are going to be much better shooting the ball. Yeah. I think they have, not only are they a team that has size and can overpower you in the front court, but they now have guys that they can kick the ball out to and knock down shots consistently. And I think they've got a very good, versatile group of guards. And I think we're going to see one of the things we talked about last year towards the end of the year. Severe Wheeler, the efficiency numbers were not great at Georgia, but a little bit of a difference playing for Georgia and Kentucky based on the roster. And so I think we're going to see that. I think we're actually going to see how good this kid is. And I think that's such a huge part of it. Kellen Grady's there, CJ Frederick, go up and down the line. Like, Washington, I mean, they are loaded. I think this is the Cal revenge tour, and I think Kentucky is just outstanding on paper. But that's not to take anything away from Alabama because I think Alabama is the deepest team in the league, and I do think they have the best guards. Once again, I think right now I would pick Jaden Shackelford as my player of the year in the SEC. So I think it's Kentucky 1, Alabama 1.1 or whatever you want to do. Like I think they're slightly behind on paper. And then there's Tennessee. I think this could be, outside of that Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield team, I think this could be Rick Barnes' best team he's had there because they got a point guard. Like they've got Kennedy Chandler now. And gosh, we talked about their offense last year, right? And how frustrating it was to watch them. But now that they have someone that is a true, in every sense of the word, like he is a point guard, I think he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And if they get the John Fulkerson that we thought could be a preseason player of the year last year, if they get that, this is a very well-rounded team. I think they'll shoot it better. Josiah Jordan-James, if he can take another step forward, I am really thrilled with Tennessee. But I also picked him to make the Final Four last year, and I'm starting to put them in that Florida category where it's like I think they've got it, but until I actually see it, it's probably hard for me to go that far with them. So.
Well, see, this surprises me because last year you were the guy on our podcast that was just down on Tennessee, and your judgment wound up being right. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. I'm not saying I believe this necessarily, but I'm just trying to walk through this, okay? Last year, well, let's go back a couple years, okay? When Rick Barnes has had his best teams at Tennessee, it was Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield and guys who had been there and really been top-notch players in the league. Tennessee doesn't really have a guy like that. And last year, everybody got excited for Tennessee because Keon Johnson, for one, was very talented, high 4-5-star type point guard, came in and ran the show, and everybody said, well, look at the guards, and all the preseason hype and everything that we bought into a good bit. And it just didn't work in the end because they didn't have that upperclassman stud that they had in the past. Now, Josiah Jordan-James, you mentioned, might be that guy. He was that guy out of high school, but hasn't proven it yet. You go back and you say, well, it's the same recipe. They bring in a highly recruited point guard, although I think Kennedy Chandler's rated higher than Keon Johnson was. And let me add one thing, and maybe this is where the jumping off point on Tennessee becomes different this year. Keon Johnson I saw play in high school, and I worried that they would have chemistry issues with him. And I don't know if that was the case or not, but I do wonder when you go back and rewind last year and say, why didn't it end better, if that had something to do with it. So I'm kind of going all over the board on Tennessee. No question the talent is there with recruiting rankings and everything. But we saw this formula last year, freshman point guard, guys who were good players who've been around but maybe not superstars. And so to me, I look at Tennessee, and if you want to play devil's advocate, is that a fair criticism, or would you pick that apart and say, no, this is why not?
Well, I mean, and let me be clear. I'm not fully confident. I don't fully trust Tennessee because I think that I'm one that, I fully trust Alabama, and, that's because I've seen what Nate Oates has done in a couple of seasons, right? Like and I like the same with Auburn, I think, where it's like over a certain amount of time, like you see the body of work and you are like, okay, I tend to think that this will be something that gets, figured out. And with Tennessee, I think the offense is where I'm just, and by the way, too, let's not forget this. Like, they do have to replace the best defensive player in the league for the past couple of years, in E. Pond. So that is also going to be a challenge, I think, for them. I don't think they'll be as good defensively, but if they can be better offensively, that can make up some of that, ground there. But I just think that I think it's Kennedy Chandler. Like, he's the difference to me. And I'm not saying that he's going to have the best pro career of that group of him, Jaden Springer, and Keon Johnson. But I think for Tennessee, I think, he might wind up being the guy that they absolutely had to have just based on how he plays and what he'll be able to do to get their offense running smoothly, because it did not run smoothly at all last year. How that team had games where they struggled to hit 50 points, I have no idea. And on the flip side, I think that even though this group may not look as talented on paper as that group, I think that there could be just a much better rhythm and a much better sort of flow to how they play. And that's kind of where I'm at with them, because you remember, they still got Victor Bailey coming back. He'll be one of the best shooters in the league. They're bringing in a Brandon Huntley Hatfield, who just an outstanding player. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities with this team. If I look up and say that they're struggling to make the NCAA tournament, would I be surprised? Yeah, probably, because I think that they should be much better than that. And so right now I'd put them at 3, behind Kentucky and Alabama. But I don't know if I'm going to say that they're the team. I mean, could they win the SEC? Sure, they could. Mm-hmm. But I think that they have a little bit of work to do to move above those other two, probably, for me right now.
Well, and here's one more thing, okay? John Fulkerson was SEC preseason player of the year last year. Came nowhere close to that. But he's a good player, and he's a better player than he was a year ago. And I think if you get Fulkerson in a situation where he doesn't have to be the guy like people were expecting him to be a year ago, but he can be a third or fourth part or wherever he settles in. I think that's probably the best version of John Fulkerson, and that's got to help.
Yeah, and I mean his experience just being there too is going to help some of these guys because that's the thing is like they are going to need Kennedy Chandler, Justin Powell, Huntley Hatfield. Like they're going to need all those guys to play a lot of minutes,
Man,
and you know
they are
they're all
so deep. I mean, as you mention these
yeah.
names, it's like, oh yeah, they've got that guy too, and that
Yeah,
I
you
think
forget
that
about
makes a
Justin
big
Powell.
case.
Like it's
Right.
yeah, like Justin Powell comes over and I mean, look at the expectations for him at Auburn. And now he comes over and I mean, he's going to be someone that man, like that adds another shooting element for them to go along with Victor Bailey. So I think this is going to be the case for a lot of teams. You know, I talked about that Kentucky team. When you look at that Kentucky team, like you're not looking at that starting lineup and saying, "Wow, there you
Mm-hmm.
go. Those five are going to be drafted in the top 15 in the draft next year." You're looking at it and saying, "Wow, like for a could be potentially great college team, like they've got the pieces they need,
Yeah.
and all those pieces fit together." And I think sometimes and I'm sure I know people have looked at this and stuff, but I think sometimes we overrate the look at all these NBA players
Yes.
versus look at
You
how all
got to
these
have shooters, and that's where Kentucky's gone wrong. And Kellen Grady was
yeah.
the perfect plug-in for them. I mean,
Oh
really.
yeah,
And
yeah.
C.J.
No, he
Frederick too, to
was.
a lesser extent. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure, and I think that's it. Is you got to remember you're constructing a college basketball team that has to defeat other college basketball teams. You're not constructing an NBA draft lineup, and again, that's just like I'm not taking anything away from guys who go to the NBA and are top 10 picks. Like they're gonna have a lot of success, and we've seen that with Kentucky guys. And it's not just a Kentucky thing, but I think sometimes we overvalue that way too much when it comes to thinking. And I've said this before with John Calipari. I don't think he gets enough credit, which I know last year people can get on him and all this, but I don't think he gets enough credit for how up until last year he was able to keep things at such a level with that
Mm.
many guys who are going to go play at the next level and that many guys who come out of high school who are, averaging 25 to 35 points a game and 15 rebounds and they're the guy and everything runs through them. That is way more of a challenge than I think, a lot of people admit that you can't just line up and say, all right, we got the five best players in the country. Let's roll the ball out and let's see what happens. It is way more complicated than that. And that's why I think that looking at some of these teams, it feels like the chemistry and the fit in terms of playing styles is there on a lot more of these teams, maybe than, you compare them to other teams that you've seen in the past at that particular school. I think that there's just the way these teams are built, I am much more fascinated with than just looking at the recruiting rankings. Because I think and I've
Yeah.
been one too, like I've really pumped up the SEC's recruiting rankings, but it's great to have the best recruiting class, but if it doesn't fit together and it's just players that are, great players, but maybe their styles just do not match whatsoever, that doesn't win you games. So I think that's gonna be a very interesting aspect, I think, this season with that.
Oh, I could not agree more. And I'm glad you brought that up, Blake, because the landscape of college basketball is entirely different than what you and I grew up with. The transfers and all the things that we could talk about ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting here thinking, I'm wondering if the best team in December and the best team in January, the best team in February, the best team in March might not be four different teams in this league because you've got so many guys that are going to have to get used to playing together. Let's not forget that kids have lost some practice time just the last couple of years and game time for not having
Yeah.
played because of the pandemic. And it really is going to be interesting to me. I wonder if we're going to make snap judgments on teams and I'm, maybe even write teams off. And then we look up in early March and go, hey, the talent was there all along. We should have known that it could have taken a while. And I think the way that it plays out on that timeline to me could really be fascinating this season.
Yeah, and I think looking at teams like Kentucky, Auburn without Flanagan, I know people are gonna if they struggle early on, there's gonna be people that are just, non-Auburn fans are gonna be like, oh, there they go again. Like, yeah, no, like I think you got to give it time. Like I think it'll be the same way with Kentucky. Would I be shocked if this Kentucky team came out and lost to Duke in the opener and had some issues, not to the extent they had last year, but some issues in the non-conference? No, I wouldn't. But I also fully believe that by the time February rolls around, Kentucky's going to be a top 10 team and probably have a chance to win the SEC. And I think it'll be this, like, put Alabama in that group too, put Arkansas in there, put all these teams that we're
Yeah.
talking about in this top tier. Like, honestly, Alabama's got to replace John Petty and Herbert Jones. That's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
Arkansas's got to replace Moses Moody and Justice Smith. That won't be easy. Tennessee, E. Pons, Springer, I mean, like
Keon
Johnson.
Right.
Like, think about that. And that's where we started this conversation is I don't know how good the SEC is going to be. I think there's a pretty wide range because we can't just act like that some of these players that were on these teams last year can be replaced that easily, because I think there were some pretty special players last year in the league,
yeah.
and there's going to be some pretty special players this year, but I think sometimes it's harder than just saying, oh, we're just going to plug in the next guy. It's not always that easy sometimes.
Okay, I want to take a left turn here and I want to see how you answer this in real time, because I got my answer in mind. I want to see if it matches yours, and I'll give you a hint. This guy that I'm going to pick is among these top 5 teams. Biggest X factor in the league is fill in the blank. Is a player.
That's a good question.
That's why I'm asking.
Let's see. Biggest X factor in the league on one of the top 5 teams.
And by that, I mean the range of expectations is massive, I think.
For one player.
Or the range of outcomes. In my mind, and I'll explain why once we get there.
We're talking about one player,
We're
right?
talking about one player.
Man. That's I don't know. I'm gonna let you have the floor on this one.
I'm gonna go Walker Kessler.
That's pretty good.
Because
Yeah, I agree with that.
don't know what he is. I saw him in high school. He thought he was a 3-point shooter. He tried to do some of that at North Carolina last year. I guess they didn't let him. He transferred. He didn't really put up huge numbers. You've seen him preseason first team All SEC in some places, but he didn't do much at UNC a year ago. Look, a lot of guys take off, but I'm just. Plus, he plays in a system where Bruce Pearl will give his guys the green light. And I haven't seen him play enough to know in the meantime to know if that's a great idea. So to me, that he's the guy that I just don't know at all what to expect. The hype's been there. He's been a McDonald's All-American, and that's always going to follow you around until you prove you're not that guy. Frankly, Josiah Jordan-James at Tennessee is sort of in the same boat. But those are two guys to me that I wish I knew what they were, and I'm really eager to see them play and see what we get out of them early against good teams.
Well, if it does work out for Kessler and Auburn can sport a 6'10" Jabari Smith and 7'1" Walker Kessler in the same lineup, that's going to be a problem, especially considering Kessler can shoot. And so, that's a good point. I think that's going to be interesting. And, one thing I think Auburn does have, if he's not, someone that maybe it is, like maybe just kind of on that same line and isn't necessarily, I don't know what the expectations would be numbers wise, but Auburn's got some depth too. And I think that's where getting Flanagan back, that will be important if they're going to make waves in the SEC. But they've got depth. They're talking Jalen Williams still there, Devin Cambridge still there. We got to remember too, like they're bringing in KD Johnson. There's another one like Severe Wheeler. We saw what he can do at Georgia. Now he's at Kentucky. KD Johnson. We saw what he can do at Georgia. Now he's at Auburn playing that system. Good luck. It's going to be hard to stop him. So I think that is one thing that Kessler will have a little more time, I think, to get acclimated, because Auburn does have a lot of depth. And, it's interesting to think if they'd have gotten JT Thor back or just, one guy like that, you think about what this team would look like. But that's a good pick. I think that it'll be interesting to see how he looks probably over the first month or so, to see how he's kind of getting acclimated to, and really how they're going to play. I think that's another one that'll be interesting.
Okay, I feel like we've barely talked Alabama. And the reason, and as we sit there and do this, you're like, man, I forgot they had this guy and that guy with all these teams. Like KD Johnson's a guy that really good player in this league at Georgia. when he was healthy last year. I mean, there's so many players in
Yeah.
the league that are just good complementary players that the rosters are so deep. But when I start thinking in this day and age, who do I trust to cut down the nets on the big stages in March? It's teams that are guard oriented. And my goodness, you bring back Quinterly and Shackelford at Alabama alone. That's a great start. You add Noah Gurley in the transfer market, and then you get J.D. Davison, who I presume is going to run that team. I mean, and like I said, they've got a 5-star recruit in Charles Bediako. Now, I know they had the Burnett injury, and that hurts, but just that alone is probably why if you put a gun to my head and say, who's going to win the league, when you start with what those guys have accomplished at guard and the fact that they played together, their main two, that's to me, and I don't know, I say that with very little confidence, but that's probably why, all things being equal, I probably start at Alabama. But again, God help you trying to sort these 5 teams out because they've all got points in their favor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a tight race for me between Alabama and Kentucky when it comes to the guards. I think you pick 3 guards. You compare Wheeler, Grady, and Washington to Shackelford, Quinterly, and Davison. I mean, that's a pretty good 3-on-3 game there if you're putting those guys out there on the floor. But I would probably still lean towards Alabama. I mean, I think it's because you've seen it with this group. Like you've seen the chemistry that's there, and that's like I mentioned. That's why I would pick Shackelford as my player of the year in the preseason. I just think that he's proven he can be someone that he can score 20 a game if he needs to. He's that good, and obviously we've seen Quinterly kind of really turn things around. Just leaving Villanova, everyone's just like, oh well, I'm like I kept saying, and I'm going to say I was right, but like you talk about such a different style of play. I mean, going from Jay Wright at Villanova, which that works for them, by the way. They've won a few national championships, I think, to Nate Oates at Alabama playing just a completely different tempo. It works, and I think Davidson will step in and be, fantastic right away. And by the way, if Keon Ellis is like your 6th man or something,
Yeah.
my goodness, like he is an all SEC player. So I think that's what, to me, in terms of like
Blake,
room for
the depth of talent in this league, I don't mean like superstars, but just guys that could be stars. I
yeah.
don't remember this many in a while.
Yeah, no, and that's why I keep saying like I would not be surprised if it's the best the SEC's been in a while, because I feel like you've got more complete teams. And yes, there are some holes. Yes, there are guys that would have to be replaced. We talked about that earlier, but it's interesting. Like it's just an interesting dynamic when it comes to looking at all these rosters. And when you look at Alabama's and you go up and down the line, there's just not a deeper team in the SEC. I think that they've got. I mean, the Mari Burnett injury hurts. I mean, not to have him. If you added him to the mix, I would have probably said, all right, I'm picking Alabama number 1, Kentucky 2. But that's probably how close that line is for me between those 2 teams. But if you just go all the way down the line, I mean, there's just my goodness, there's so many options I think for Alabama to work with, to where there's a lot to like about this. But on the same thing, I mean, they've got 4 guys or 5 guys, I guess. Jones, Petty, Primo, Bruner, Reese, like all 5 of those guys played a big part in them running through the SEC like they did last year. So, it's a numbers thing. They're adding a lot of talent, but they're also subtracting quite a bit too. So I think that's another one where what's that adjustment process look like? What's the chemistry with this group? But if you just look at their depth, I don't think anyone else is deeper in the SEC.
Well, we got to talk Arkansas before we close because we really haven't mentioned them much. I mean, Chris Likes at Miami was a stat sheet stuffer. Aldis Toney came from, I think, Pitt, where he was a really good player.
Yeah.
Stanley Umude from, I think, South Dakota. He was a 22-point a game, he put up numbers across the board kind of guy. That team, and Eric Musselman knows how to build a team. And last year, you talk about them losing guys. Well, a lot of those guys last year, Blake, were guys that were new to the program, and it worked out just fine. By the way, J.D. Note is still around. Another really good piece. And so that one, the way they play stylistically, they can give people problems. Going to be interesting there too.
Yeah, we talk about depth and we
Yeah,
compare.
and that's the thing. They may not have as much as some of these other teams
Yeah, but you don't have to have depth if you're really good 1 through 6 or 7.
unless you get guys
And,
hurt.
right. And that's what I was going to say. I think Arkansas is an injury away from, like, I don't know what to expect in that scenario. But you could say that probably for a lot of different teams. If you talk about take out their best player or something, and it's different. But numbers wise, like, this team looks good. Like, I think, like you said, you guys come in who have produced elsewhere in the ACC with Likes and Tony. Those guys, I mean, Amude, 21 points per game. I don't care where you're at. That's pretty good. And Note's back, and that certainly helps. But again, take even someone like Jalen Tate, who did a lot for them last year. In addition to Moses Moody and Justin Smith, that is what I'm most intrigued by with this team is they're going to have to play different because, I mean, when you have a Moses Moody on the floor and a Justin Smith, and we talked about Justin Smith, right? Like, we didn't think he was getting enough.
No.
He got a lot of credit, but he didn't get enough credit for getting a team to, win away from the Final Four.
He was their second best player down the stretch last year.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, we're talking about two guys too that, I mean, they're NBA, level type in terms of like how they're built and all those other things. So that made some things easier too, I think, defensively. But I don't know. I don't think Arkansas's got this, I don't expect Arkansas to bottom out or go into the, bottom half or anything like that. But I also look at the upside, and I think that's what you have to compare when you're trying to do this in the preseason is what's their upside versus the upside of Kentucky, Alabama, maybe Tennessee, and Auburn. I think Arkansas is right there, in that 4 or 5 range to me in terms of upside. But, and I think it's just because we know what to expect with Muss teams when it comes to transfers. He hits way more than he misses on these guys. But I am most curious about how do things look without Moses Moody and Justin Smith because they were such a huge part of what they did last year. It's going to be a different team. There's going to be different pieces in place, but I think they don't have the depth that some of these other teams have, and I think that's something that what if one of these guys doesn't hit that you really expect, to come in and just be fantastic? What if he doesn't hit? Do you have enough options to turn to elsewhere to maybe make up for that? So it'll be interesting to see. But like I said, it's not like I think Arkansas is going to be a bubble team or anything. But I do think that there's an interesting range for them just based on maybe how they get things started. So.
Blake, before we end the show today, any parting thoughts of stuff we didn't get to?
No, as you heard, a lot of what ifs and a lot of unknowns. I think that's the case with the SEC. So, yeah. I mean, it's as always. Don't overreact to one loss. Don't overreact to 2 weeks into the season. I think that it will take some time for some of these teams, and we may look up and say, "Oh, Kentucky's not as good as we thought they were." This team's better than we thought they were. But I think you kind of have to get through the non-conference before you really have a pretty good understanding of what these teams are going to be. So
it'll be a blast. We'll have you covered. We're going to launch our player rankings soon. And so anyway, be sure to go to southeastern14.com. Of course, we still got football season going on and lots of content there. Anyway, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for watching our show today.